Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World, the Eurozone. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines coming out of Europe this hour. Russia has launched drones and missiles targeting power substations supplying 2 nuclear plants in Ukraine, killing 7 people. Kyiv accuses Moscow of endangering Europe's nuclear safety as thousands lose power after widespread damage. Russia's defense ministry says its forces have captured the town of Rybin in Ukraine's Zaporozhye region. Moscow adds that troops are also advancing in offensive operations around Morinhad. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says he is ready to meet US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but insists Moscow's interests must be respected. The Kremlin also denies reports that Lavrov has fallen out of favor with President Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on Europe, the G7 and the US to tighten sanctions on Russia's energy sector. He warned that Moscow still profits from oil and gas trade and accesses Western microelectronics for its military. Moving on, 3 people have been killed and 15 injured as powerful waves hit the Spanish island of Tenerife. Rescuers say 2 men were pulled from the water in separate incidents but could not be saved despite airlift and beach efforts. Tens of thousands have marched in Lisbon to protest the government's labour law overhaul and demand for higher wages. Portugal's main union, the CGTP, says the plan favours big businesses as workers struggle with soaring living costs. Hungary claims it has an indefinite exemption from US sanctions on Russian oil and gas, but the White House insists the waiver only lasts for 1 year. Prime Minister Viktor Orban secured the deal after meeting President Trump in Washington. Spain has launched a year-long commemoration marking 5 decades since dictator Francisco Franco's death. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez warned of the far-right's resurgence in Europe as Spain celebrates its transition to democracy. And those are the headlines this hour. We start with, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where Moscow's defense ministry has reported continued offensive operations in Ukraine's Morinhad region. The Russian Defense Ministry further stated that 7 Ukrainian attacks have been repelled in the Pokrovsk region, which was an attempt to break out of encirclement. The ministry has also stated that 6 Ukrainian attempts to free surrounded units in the Kupiansk area have been successfully repelled. Furthermore, Russia has targeted energy facilities supporting Ukraine's defense industry. Additionally, the Russian forces have also captured the town of Rybin in Ukraine's Zaporozhye region. Okay, of course, we are discussing the ongoing war in Ukraine and the developments from the battlefield. The Russian Defense Ministry has, of course, reported continued defense operations in Ukraine's east, in particular the Morinhad region. The Russian Defense Ministry has also, of course, stated that 7 Ukrainian attacks have been repelled in that battle for Pokrovsk, which was an attempt to break out of the encirclement of the logistics hub. 7 people have been killed in the past 24 hours also after power stations, substations were targeted in Ukraine. Now joining us is Professor Georgi Toleraya. He is a professor at the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Toleraya, here on the program. It's a pleasure to have you. Of course, developments from the battlefield. Moscow says its forces have captured Rybin in Zaporozhye and are advancing on Morinhad. How significant are these gains strategically and the whole, in context to the whole Zaporozhye region as well?
Well, I would say that the Russian troops are advancing and they're ending the encirclement of Ukrainian troops, although Ukrainians sometimes report differently. But anyway, no one can argue that the Russian advance is steady and consistent. Of course, it won't be stopped unless all the territories which voted at the referendum for joining Russia wouldn't be freed, wouldn't be uh, liberated from the Ukrainian troops. So this has to go on. And at the same time, Russia is also advancing in strategic terms. This night, there's been a coordinated strike on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, especially power plants and power station. This is just a usual way of modern war in every modern conflicts. Well, we can remember even US-Iraq attacks. They usually start and include attacking the enemy's energy structure, and that's especially important to stop supply of armament and to stop supply of different kind of ammunition to Ukrainian troops. The same goes with the attacking the railroads and other logistic infrastructure, and I'm sure it will go on. At the
Yeah.
same time, Ukrainians keep on sending the drones. I think this night there was 250 drones sent to Russia, different parts of Russia, and unfortunately, this also has to go on unless there will be some kind of peace talks and some kind of agreement.
Yes, Professor Toleraya, do stay with us. We have further updates from the battlefield. And Russia has launched a barrage of drones and missiles in overnight attacks on Ukraine, killing 7 people. The strikes targeted substations that supply power to 2 nuclear power plants. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha, Russia is once again targeting substations that power the Klementensky and Rivne nuclear power plants. He also noted that these attacks were not accidental, but were well-planned strikes as Russia continues to deliberately endanger Europe's nuclear safety. Those are, of course, comments from the Ukrainian side. And meanwhile, Ukrainian Energy Minister Svitlana Hernchuk says that emergency crews have stabilized the power grid, but also warned that consumers might face further power cuts to allow repairing work. Okay, Professor Toleraya joins us once again. Your thoughts, of course, on these accusations from Kiev saying that Moscow's actions here, when they target these nuclear substations that power the nuclear plants, the significant nuclear plants in Ukraine, that endangers the whole of Europe's nuclear safety, as of course thousands of people in Ukraine lose access to power. Professor Toleraya.
Well, I think this report's very ominous because it's maybe a cover, which has been in fact reported several days ago by Russian intelligence, that Europeans with the hands of Ukraine are planning some major provocation at the Zaporozhye atomic power plant, nuclear power plant, which is controlled by Russia. They plan a provocation that could even lead to meltdown of the reactors, and that would in fact endanger the whole of Ukraine and part of Europe. That would be a major disaster, much more dangerous than Chernobyl disaster
Yeah.
40 years ago. These plans are absolutely crazy. This is quite a absolute crazy plan that would enable Europe to accuse Russia of some kind of nuclear blackmail or nuclear danger and mobilize Europe and US to fight this threat. So this plan has already been publicized. and hope it won't work. But at the same time, I note these reports by Ukrainian mass media that substations to nuclear stations, other nuclear stations in Ukraine have been attacked. This is sort of a preparation on the topic of nuclear threat emanating from Russia, because as I've mentioned, we actually attacked the energy infrastructure, mostly thermal power plants and their substations. Some of them may double to nuclear power plants, but singling out this nuclear aspect is very telling. It's very dangerous plan which might be being implemented. So we must watch. We must watch very carefully what Ukrainians and the European masters, most I would say adventurous circles of military-industrial complex are doing.
Okay, Professor Toleraya, thank you very much for explaining that for us, and do stay with us. Where Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure have left over 20,000 residents without power across several border regions. In Belgorod, Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported severe damage to electricity and heating networks, leaving multiple streets without power supply. In the neighbouring Kursk region, a fire at a power plant in Kornevo disrupted electricity in 10 municipalities. Simultaneously, another fire broke out at a heating facility in the Voronezh region. Russia's defense ministry has said that its forces destroyed 44 Ukrainian drones over Bryansk as Kyiv continues to target Russian energy infrastructure as the winter approaches. Of course, that winter is approaching, Professor Toleraya. And can you talk to me a little bit about, the fact that both of these sides are targeting energy infrastructure here as that biting Eastern European winter descends. What is the significance of the timing here? And of course, we've seen history will tell us that the Ukrainian winter can be weaponized. Is this another example of that?
Well, I've told you at the beginning that attacking the enemy's infrastructure is a standard feature of modern conflict, mostly used by US against Iraq and other countries. So there's small wonder that the Russians are doing the same. I'm just personally wondering why it wasn't done before. Probably there was hope that the conflict will end soon. So we consider the need for humanitarian aspects so that the population won't suffer. So for 3 years, there has not been much attacks on the energy infrastructure and transport infrastructure, but now I think it's the time, unfortunately, to do this. And of course, the winter is close by, and we'll have snow pretty soon, in a couple of weeks probably. And those people who won't have energy and thermal supply would suffer, of course. But it's up to Ukrainians to end this conflict, just to admit defeat and start the peace talks.
Professor, how are Russians feeling in these regions that Ukrainians are targeting? You have the likes of Belgorod and of course other regions which are consistently being hit by Ukrainian drones in particular. How is it affecting their life there, and also the significance why Ukraine is targeting them specifically?
Well, they're targeting the areas they could reach, of course, the border areas, and of course, that's quite a problem. The people have to remember their former generation during the Second World War, when the Germans tried to freeze out the city of Leningrad, modern St. Petersburg, where there was no supply of electricity or no supply of heating. And so lots of people died from frost and lived without any electric light. So we have to remember this unfortunate time. And of course, the authorities are trying to repair and to to provide alternative sources of energy and heating. But anyway, of course, it's a major setback for both for the people's life and economy.
Yes, Professor Georgi Toleraya, thank you very much, as always, for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you. We now move on and to some diplomatic updates. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that ending the conflict in Ukraine is impossible without addressing its root causes and taking Russia's interests into account. Speaking to reporters, Lavrov reaffirmed that Moscow will not abandon its core conditions for peace, including Kyiv renouncing NATO membership and withdrawing troops from regions claimed by Russia. Lavrov stated the importance of maintaining regular communication with the United States, saying he and the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, understand the need for dialogue on the Ukrainian issue. He also expressed readiness to hold face-to-face meetings with Rubio when necessary. His comments come after the cancellation of a planned summit between US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Budapest. Now joining us to discuss these diplomatic updates is Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, always a pleasure to talk to you. Of course, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that he is ready for these face-to-face talks with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. What does this signal?
These kinds of meetings have been on and off throughout the period of time since the Trump administration took office at the end of January, whether that's meetings at the foreign minister level or even at the leadership level between Trump and Putin. So there's often talk and cancellation, and then there's talk again, and sometimes these meetings actually do happen. I think the important thing to keep in mind here, looking at it from the American perspective more than the Russian perspective, is that the Trump administration continues to be willing to engage in this process. And again, sometimes these meetings proceed, sometimes events transpire that cause one side or the other to say, now's not the right time. But ultimately, in the interest of reaching a ceasefire or some kind of long-term cessation of hostilities, it's clear the Trump administration remains engaged in that process. And as long as the Trump administration remains engaged, then it seems clear that the Russian government will remain engaged as well.
Yes, and Ross, we've seen nothing but political showmanship between the United States and Russia since Donald Trump took office for the second time. Of course, we've seen that meeting cancelled between Trump and Putin in Budapest. And of course, no one can really know what Donald Trump is thinking currently. But what's changed from the Russian side, where it comes that Sergei Lavrov wants to have this conversation now? Of course, the US has imposed new sanctions on 2 crude oil companies in Moscow, which reports have said that they've been quite hard-hitting on the Russian economy. What has made it so Lavrov is supposedly interested in peace talks at this moment?
Again, the Russian side or the Ukrainian side, they've been interested, I would say, throughout the course of this year, ever since the Trump administration expressed a willingness to be a mediator in this process. But yes, the level of interest has at times increased and at times decreased, whether that's from Ukraine or Russia. But the reality is that there are a number of moving parts here. On the one hand, as you mentioned, the United States has imposed sanctions on 2 of Russia's major oil companies. There's talk that India might reduce its purchases. There's talk that even China might reduce its purchases. Obviously, that's a concern for the Russian government. And the Russian government really does have an incentive to reach a peace agreement that would include a removal of international sanctions, or at least facilitate the continued purchases by India and China. On the other hand, Russia in recent hours is claiming some battlefield success with the potential capture of Pokrovsk, which might also incentivize Russia to return to talks, because they might take the view that they have the upper hand on the battlefield, and that kind of forces Ukraine to reach the best deal that is possible for Ukraine. So I would say, even if this process falls apart at the moment, and a meeting between Rubio and Lavrov doesn't come to fruition, or a meeting or a phone call between Putin and Trump doesn't come to fruition in the coming days or weeks, chances are these things will heat up again 3-4 weeks from now.
Yes, Ross, thank you very much. Do stay with us as we move west to the Iberian Peninsula for our next story. And tens of thousands of people are protesting in Lisbon against the centre-right government's plan to overhaul labour laws, which unions say will undermine workers' rights, and to demand higher wages. The CGTP, which is Portugal's biggest union, called the protest, accusing the government of favouring big business while low-paid workers struggle with rising living costs. The union says that around 100,000 demonstrators occupied the capital's main avenue, although no police estimate for the crowd size is yet available. This comes as Prime Minister Luis Montenegro's government approved a draft bill to amend the labour code in September, saying that it aims to boost competitiveness. Now, Ross, of course, there's serious public anger over this, seemingly, in the Portuguese capital, with Montenegro's government facing mass protests over these planned labour laws changes. What's driving this level of public anger?
Who wants to work longer or for less pension money than previous generations received? Look, after the Second World War, the countries of Western Europe built very elaborate social safety nets, whether that's medical care, education, early retirement compared to other places around the world. And people have enjoyed the benefits of that for decades. But it's simply not sustainable. And we've seen that in the larger economies of Europe, France and the United Kingdom, for example. Those social safety nets that were constructed and cost a lot of money and often came with higher taxes than other parts of the world. It's simply not sustainable, especially with other demands, whether that was over the past 10 years with the refugee crisis and a lot of public money that was diverted to that, and now there's a backlash in some places, or defense spending. And European countries are under tremendous pressure from President Trump to increase defense spending. So the level of spending that went for things like pensions and medical care and education, it's no longer available. And governments realize that. The problem is every time a government in Europe tries to make those changes, people take to the streets. And we've seen that numerous times throughout Europe.
And of course, post-pandemic, Europe is a continent with many economic issues. Are we seeing a broader trend of backlash against austerity-style labour policies here, Ross, in the continent?
Well, again, this kind of bubbles up and dissipates, and then it bubbles up again. It really depends on the government of the day and whether or not they try to prioritize this issue or they want to leave it for the future. And it's very possible they'll lose power, and the center-right government will lose power, and a center-left government will take power, saying that we're not going to make these changes. But then eventually they'll be confronted with the same budget and spending realities that the current government is trying to deal with, because the past level of spending and borrowing is simply not sustainable, especially with growth relatively flat. The governments are just not bringing in the amount of revenue that could satisfy all the commitments that have been made in the past for this kind of social spending. So whether they take action now or they take action in the future under a future government, eventually not just Portugal but other countries in Europe are going to have to make these changes because their level of social spending is simply not sustainable.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for your insight on that. Pleasure to have you on the programme as always. We now move on and stay in the region, and 3 people have died and 15 others were injured as powerful waves struck the Spanish island of Tenerife. Emergency services confirmed that a man died after being swept into the water at the La Gancha beach in the north of the island. He was airlifted by rescue teams but was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. In a separate incident, another man was found floating at the El Cabezo beach in the south and could not be revived by lifeguards. A third victim was a woman who died of a heart attack after a massive wave swept 10 people into the sea at the Porto de la Cruz beach. 3 others from this group still remain hospitalized with serious injuries, and officials have placed the Canary Islands on high alert for coastal hazards as strong winds and high tides continue to batter the region. Authorities urged residents and tourists to avoid beach areas and follow safety warnings. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.